everyone, it's Miss Mini Life, and today I am super excited because I am building a tiny little Switch holder for my Nintendo Switch that I got. It is an Animal Crossing themed Switch holder that came out so perfect. I'm so happy with it. Okay, flashback. I got a Nintendo Switch from one of my brothers for my birthday last year, and then it sat for months until Christmas when I finally got a game for it, which is Animal Crossing New Horizons. It's my first Nintendo Switch game, and I wanted to make something Animal Crossing themed because of that. All of the supplies that I use are going to be down in the description box, and I'm also going to put a link to my Patreon for the templates that I create to build this. So if you guys want to use those templates to make something Animal Crossing themed for yourselves, then you can get it down in my Patreon. Yeah, I think that's it, guys. So let's get started crafting. What is this? What am I doing right now? I don't know, I'm just happy. All right, let's go. I did a super rough sketch of what I wanted this build to look like. Doing a sketch, even if it's a rough one, helps me to envision each of the pieces that I'm gonna include and what size they are in relation to other things that are around them. Then I got this balsa wood that's 2.5 inches by 5 inches and about 1/4 inch thick. These pieces came pre-cut, so I just lucked out that it completely covers my Switch and was the perfect size for what I wanted to create. I edited together a bunch of different images in Photoshop so that I had a guide for the size that I wanted to make everything, and just checked that against the piece of wood that I was going to be crafting on to make sure everything was going to fit. The Photoshop guide is really helpful for tracing out and making different pattern pieces, and I needed all the help I could get because I am making this thing almost entirely out of polymer clay. And for those of you who have been following my channel for a while, you know that I am not the biggest fan of polymer clay and that I am very new to using it. I do have to say, I really loved how this turned out, and I learned a lot while using this. For instance, I learned that you can mix custom colors of polymer clay, and I don't know why this never even occurred to me, but I mixed everything to be the exact color match that I wanted for this build. At first I was doing it by hand, but you could see that got old really fast, so I used my pasta maker or clay conditioner, whatever you want to call it, and that worked out a lot better. After about 5 passes, it had completely mixed the colors together. So I prepped all of my polymer clay colors in advance, and then I rolled out some white clay to get started on transferring over my patterns. I'm doing the house first because that was the most intimidating part of this build to me, and I've had a lot of trouble with polymer clay getting things to look precise or to get straight edges. So I did everything I could on this project to make sure that everything stayed really neat, and I was so careful while I was cutting and drawing all of the lines because this is based on a design from a video game. It's not based on just something out of my head, and I wanted to make sure that it actually looked like the source material. I'm transferring my drawings over to the clay by rubbing on the back of the tracing paper and depositing the graphite from the pencil onto the clay. I started cutting it out and removing pieces, but then it started to lose the precision of the shape, so I left the pieces in place while I baked it in the oven. That way, none of the parts got distorted. I know that only looked like a second due to the magic of editing, but I baked it for 30 minutes, and then once it was hard, it was easy to pop out all of the little cutout pieces and glue it down to the wall of the house. I traced and baked a tiny door, and then I used black acrylic paint for the windows. I'm using super glue and gluing the door in place. I used more super glue to glue on the rest of the decorative parts of the front and to glue the entire house together. Next, it's time to make the roof. I had a stencil that happened to have this scalloped edge that looked perfect for the parts of the roof that I was having trouble trying to figure out how I was going to cut. So I used that to trace out the shape and then cut out strips. And I added those scallops to a part that I had already measured to be the roof. I couldn't bake the house in the oven because I used super glue to glue it together, so I used tin foil to make sure that the shape of the roof wouldn't get distorted, and then I baked it on top of the tin foil and super glued it down to the rest of the house. I realized I forgot the stone base for the house, so I cut out a foundation out of gray clay, and then I used the house to leave an impression in the clay where I was going to need to glue it down later so that I could bake the clay without the house going into the oven. Once it was baked, I glued the house down to the foundation, and then I moved on to making the landscape. I mixed more clay colors together to get the color of the ground, and then I layered several different flat, rolled out pieces on top of each other to build it up to the thickness that I wanted. The ground and mountains in Animal Crossing are super cute and blocky and chunky, so I just used a knife to carve out the cracks. And I tried to smooth the edges while leaving it in a very cubey, boxy shape. I baked it, and then I rolled out a custom-made piece of green for the grass and rolled that on top. I stuck the wet clay to the dry clay that had already been baked using Super Sculpey liquid medium, and then I smoothed it all down and cut out the little edges of the grass using an X-Acto knife. And I used the liquid Sculpey again to glue the sheet of rolled out glue for the water down to the wood. Now we have to pause on the background to go over to the most underrated part of this build that I expected to be a breeze and which actually took me the most time. I'm building one of the Animal Crossing cute little circle trees that they have growing around in your village, and I'm mixing together some more green for the leaves. And now that I have lots of green, because I know I'm going to be making lots of leaves, I decided I was going to make a punch so that I didn't have to sit there carving out each individual leaf all day. And that was highly successful, except that these leaves were way too big. Unfortunately, I had already done a lot of work before I attempted to put them onto the little tree mold that I made, and I realized they were too big, so I ended up cutting out the leaves by hand in the end anyway. I'm pretty sure that in the world of Animal Crossing, the trees are just 3 balls of leaves stuck on top, but you never actually see a 3-dimensional tree in the world because no matter what angle you look at them from, it's just that flat 3 balls of leaves image. So to make it into a real world object, I decided to make 4 round sections of tree for the bottom and 1 on top, so that when you look at it from the front on, it'll look like those 3 leaf balls. And then the tree stumps in Animal Crossing are super cute, and they have an interesting swirl pattern on them. So I baked the base color of the polymer clay, and then after it was dry, I used brown acrylic paint to paint on the rings. I used more liquid Sculpey to stick the top of the tree down to the tree trunk. And then there were still a few places that needed to be touched up, since underneath all of the green, there were a bunch of white polymer clay circles. And next I made some tiny tulips to go in the front yard of my little house. I rolled out the stem for the tulip and then pre-baked that, and then I used super Sculpey liquid to glue it down to the still wet clay for the other parts of the tulip, and then re-baked it again. I'm painting on all of the triangles that act as grass in Animal Crossing. This was the only part of the project where I felt like I didn't really need to be that precise. I loved this part. I think the little triangles look like confetti. I also painted in the cracks to make them stand out a little bit more, and on the walls of the cliff face in Animal Crossing, there are also some horizontal lines that I painted with acrylic paint. Once everything was dry, I started gluing all of the pieces in place, and I'm using super glue to attach everything together. The last thing to do to the landscape was to add some UV resin over the river and to cure it with an ultraviolet light. Now to assemble the actual holder part, I'm gluing the wood pieces together using wood glue. I marked off how thick my Nintendo Switch was, and then I'm gluing another piece in the back just to hold it in place. And it's done! I am so happy. This is the most successful build I've ever had with polymer clay, I think, and I am starting to love it more and more the more that I work with it. So I'm really happy that I just keep trying it, because each time I learn something else that makes me like it a lot more. I want to say a huge thank you to Deb, Samantha, Fred, Ash, Rosemary, Lori, Snowy May, Jennifer, Jordan, Ryan, Ashley, Geek Filter, Explosive Runes, and Lisa. Thank you so much to my Tier 3 patrons on Patreon, and I will see everybody in the next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you liked and you want to subscribe. All right, bye-bye.